Mr. Chair, meeting is live now.
Okay, great. I just lost my screen. 1 second. All right, welcome everybody. Tonight, June 22nd, for Halifax West Community Council. We have a short agenda, but couldn't be long depending on how we approach this meeting. So before we start, I'll do a quick check of audio and video for councilors that are here, starting with Councilor Morse.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you,
Happy
Councilor
to
Mason.
join you.
Oh, sorry. Councilor Mason.
Here, ready when you are, Mr. Chair.
All right, Councilor Clary.
So clearly, we're not doing this in alphabetical or numerical order. Representing Halifax West District 9, happy to be here, Mr. Chair.
Great. And Councilor Cuttle.
Good evening, everyone.
And Councilor Studdard's not here at the moment, but I'm sure she'll join us when she can. So moving on to the agenda approval of the minutes of May 11th. Mover and a seconder, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Cleary, second by Councilor Mason. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none. Moving on to approval of order of business and approval of additional additions and deletions. Anything, Ms. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no additional deletions.
Great. I'm wondering if committee would be interested in changing 13.12 ahead of 13.11, the center plan, just to get, so we don't keep Sean here all night if we end up going along.
Yes, please.
All right. Cool.
Also, along those lines, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, due to scheduling issue, I have to step out to the Ronald McDonald House Public Information Meeting in half an hour, just under half an hour. So yes, if we can dispense with that one, the Quinpool Road first, that'd be great.
All right, great. So we're going to move 13.12 ahead of 13.11, which should be fairly quick. So there's no issues there. Get a motion for the amended agenda.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Moved by Councilor
Second.
Cuttle, second by Councilor Clary. Assuming there's no discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Opposed, say nay. Seeing none. All right, have an agenda. Business arising over the minutes. There's none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts? Seeing none. Motions of reconsideration, none. Motions of rescission, none. Consideration deferred business, none. Notice of table matters, there are none. We do not have any hearings this evening, public hearings or variance hearings. But we do have correspondence, petitions, delegations, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been 5 pieces of correspondence received and distributed to the Community Council, and one of them is for today's item 13.1.1.
Great, thank you. Any petitions from members? None, and we have no presentations. We have no information items that have been brought forward. So moving on to reports and going to 13.12, case 20520 development agreement for 6330 and 6324 Quinpool Road between Oxford Street and Preston Street. And Mr. Sean Gillis is here.
Good evening, councilors, Mr. Chair. As this is first reading, I don't have a presentation plan, but I'm happy to discuss the agreement and anything in the report should Community Council wish.
All right. Great. So just noting that Mr. Gillis is there. If anyone has any questions, Mr. Mason, take it away.
I move that Halifax and West Community Council give notice of motion to consider the proposed development agreement as set out in attachment A to enable an 8-story plus penthouse mixed-use development at 6324 and 6330 Quinpool Road and a 3-story section facing Pepperell Street, and schedule a public hearing. I so move.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Mason, second by Councilor Clary. Any discussion?
I will just say briefly, we are almost at the point where we'll stop saying for the new people, but for the new people, this was before us in an earlier phase of enabling, and we required some changes on the Pepperell side, which I am pleased to see are there. But this is actually a response to this already being before before us in 2019 or early 2020. So we'll get a staff report, or we'll get the presentation from Sean at the public hearing. But I just wanted to acknowledge that this has been here before and was changed by us, as I recall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Oh, I don't have my chat up. Sorry. All right, seeing nothing in the chat. Call for the question.
Question.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, so that is gone. And Mr. Gillis, you are free to roam, or whatever you do for the evening. All right, so going to 13.141 draft regional center secondary municipal planning strategy, RCSMPS in land use bylaw, RCLUB review. So we do have Mr. Setbacks here. If we want a presentation, many of us have seen this multiple times. If we want a Coles Note version of the presentation, we can get it for the public that's watching. But if committee is fine to move on to discussion, we can do that. Really, I'm taking my cues from what the committee wants to do.
I know this presentation has been recorded through other sessions. If there's anyone watching who would like to see the full presentation, is there a link we can send them so they can watch the full presentation?
Yeah, if they reach out to the clerk's office. I know the CPED, or not CPED. I always get them confused. I think it was CDAC. Has presentation twice maybe at this point, so we could send that to any resident who's interested. Sean.
I was just going to say there would be, so the Harbor East Marine Drive has done their meeting on this. So there's a presentation there. CDAC has had several presentations from Ben, Kasia, Eric, and others who have been doing these presentations. And so if any member of the public is currently watching and would like to see multiple presentations, but various aspects, probably the best one would be the Community Design Advisory Committee meetings, where there have been at least four presentations on this current draft. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's sounding like the committee doesn't mind us to go without the presentation. So I know Ben and team are here to answer questions as we move forward. So I'd ask that someone put the motion on the floor and we can.
Be happy to do that.
All right.
I move that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, give first reading and schedule a public hearing to consider the Regional Center Secondary Municipal Planning Strategy and the Regional Center Land Use Bylaw as set out in attachments A and B of the staff report dated May 7th, 2021. 2, give first reading and schedule a public hearing to consider the proposed amendments to the Halifax Municipal Planning Strategy as set out in attachment G of the staff report dated May 7th, 2021. 3, adopt the Regional Center Secondary Municipal Planning Strategy and the Regional Center Land Use Bylaw as set out in attachments A and B of the staff report dated May 7th, 2021, including repealing the Regional Center Secondary Municipal Planning Strategy Package A and the Regional Center Land Use Bylaw Package A and the Land Use Bylaw for Halifax Peninsula. And 4, adopt the proposed amendments to the Halifax Municipal Planning Strategy as contained in attachment G of the staff report dated May 7th, 2021. I so move.
I'll second that.
Oh, I'll let Councillor Cuttle get that second.
Yep. Moved by Councillor Mason and seconded by Councillor Cuttle. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the first question is to you, Mr. Chair. How do you want your poison? So I have 7 amendments to the land use bylaw. And do you want me to just read them all and then speak to them, or do you want me to move them separately? I'm worried about us having to suspend the rules and go to committee of the whole if we do them separately.
Yeah, so that was going to be, and I should have actually polled you through email, but the question was, did we want to do committee of the whole for this, understanding that some of us have many amendments that might take us longer than 5 and 3 minutes to discuss, or we can put them all on the table, and if there's questions, I don't really know the easiest way.
How about we may need to go to committee of the whole, and I'm cognizant that I promised the nice people at Ronald McDonald I'd drop in at the start of their meeting. But so how about I just drop these into the chat I'll do them all at once, and then I'm going to read them all, and then I can. Why isn't it letting me post it? Copy. Maybe it's too much text.
So should we
Chair,
go?
if I could interject, Councillor Cleary,
Yeah.
I would like to go to committee of the whole because I also have a number of amendments that I would like to move, and depending on the discussion that might happen for each one, it would not be possible to just have my 5 minutes and 3 minutes. We would need to do multiple rounds. And also it would give Councillor Mason the opportunity to pop in and pop out. So he could do a few now, leave, we could do some more, and he could come back.
So yeah, move. We do move to committee of the whole rules.
Second.
All right. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Mason, second by Councillor Cleary, that we move to committee of the whole rules, which means we will have unlimited amount of time to speak, but we will hopefully not use all of it. Okay, so since Councillor Mason,
I think we need to vote on that.
Oh yeah, sorry. All those in favor, committee of the whole rules, say aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none. So, Councillor Mason, do you want to take your?
Yeah, how about I put,
5
if I
minutes?
may, Mr. Chair, I'll put my first three on and I'll speak to
Yep.
them. And if if there's a lot of going back and forth, once we get to four, they get a little bit more complicated. So I'll just move those first three. So my motion is to amend that Halifax and West Community Council recommend Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw and secondary municipal planning strategy as applicable. One, such that the entirety of Grafton Park, the former Memorial Library lands, including the side of the lot with the old library building, PID 000769943, be rezoned to PCF. Two, so that the proposed zoning for the former Ben's Bread lands between Shirley Pepperell be zoned ER3 and HR1 20 meters as appropriate. And three, to reduce the allowable heights in the land use bylaw such that ER1 zone lands in the proposed Creighton Fields HCD have a limit of 8 meters. I so move.
Seconder on that.
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Second by Councillor Cleary. Really quickly, I can't, and I don't know if the clerk needs to enable this, but I can't copy your text for some reason. So I don't know if if there's a way that can be enabled, so we have that information.
I see.
Anyway.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, by default, that function is disabled.
Okay.
So if Councillor Mason could send me the motion by email, that would be appreciated.
Sure. All right. I'll send it to both of you right now while we're talking.
All right.
So if I may, how do you want to wait for that, or should I go ahead, Mr. Chair?
No, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay. So send it to you in 2 seconds once I'm done speaking to them. So these first three are pretty straightforward. We rezoned, number one, we rezoned Grafton Park, that's the site of the former Memorial Library, to allow for downtown development when it looked like the Volta Labs partnership was going to happen there with the province. That hasn't happened. The land was never divided. It's still one PID. It's the historical requirement on the 1800s deed that gave the poorhouse burial ground to the city, and the 1949 amendment to the deed that allowed the library to be built say that we can only do a park or a library there, and there really is no talk of doing anything more significant there right now. If we partnered with the university, it shouldn't be in the DH1 zone, it should be a university zone, and it's seeming increasingly unlikely that we're ever going to do anything there other than have a park. So I'd like to restore the park zoning. The second one is the former Ben's Bread lands were zoned to ER1, and it was a simple oversight that in fact there's the Berkeley opened on I think April 21st with a 20-meter building, and half of the townhouses or stacked townhouses have been built already, and the other half are being sold. The lots are being sold for development right now. And then the third one is perhaps the most contentious of these, which is that the LUB for in the LUB, the ER1 zone lands in Creighton Fields, that's kind of, think about Bauer, Falkland, Creighton, Maynard, all the way up to West Street is where the proposed HCD is. Most of the key historic assets that haven't been modified already there are only 2 stories tall. And so with the development pressure we have now, the rule is, while you're trying to bring in an HCD, zone to the envelope of what's already there to keep it from being changed or torn down. So if we have an 11-meter development, development rights there. With the pressure we have now, we'll see a lot more of those historic buildings have all of the gingerbread torn off and be turned into 3-story apartments. So some of the buildings there will be legal non-conforming, but that won't mean they can stop functioning. It just buys us some time till the HCD is done. So that's my first proposed set of amendments, Mr. Chair.
Great. Any comments from members on those first 3? Councilor Cuttle?
Yeah, wait, I get 1 and 2. I mean, 1 and 3. I'm wondering if you can just explain a little bit more about what's going on with number 2 on Shirley and Pepperell with the ER3.
Sure, the development agreement for that site enables townhouses and a 6-story building, but the zoning that's being proposed doesn't recognize the development agreement that's already in place. So the HR1 would apply to where the building just opened that's been built. It's 6 stories tall on Pepperell Street. And the ER3 would apply to the stacked townhouses on Preston that are already built, and the townhouses the DA enables on Shirley Street. So everywhere else in the area, if there's already an apartment building, we've zoned it HR. It's just a matter of these buildings were still under construction when package A was done. So caught that, and I think it would be appropriate to zone it to what's actually there instead of what would have been there 100 years ago.
So it's almost like bringing an existing non-conforming use into.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we don't do it, then that will become an existing non-conforming use that's only allowed by DA, which doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Not seeing any other members.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Councilor Morse.
Yeah, thank you. What can someone outline exactly what's permitted under PCF zone other than parks? Are there other? It's community facilities, right?
Yeah. Through Mr. Chair, I can answer that question, Councillor Morris. So the Parks and Community Facility Zone, of course, allows parks, but it also allows for other types of community facility uses. And if you bear with me, I might just open up the land use bylaw quickly to find so I can kind of read off some of the other permitted uses. It's community centers. These I'm going to forget right now. Well, things like daycare uses, cultural uses, library use, spectator venues, public buildings, school use as well. Any type of park and community facility uses. So that includes like club recreations, the cemetery, community recreation, conservation type uses, park use, which is also quite a big one. Things like parking structures and things like that as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of what's permitted in that PCF zone, with some of the requirements kind of a low lot coverage requirement. So it has to stay, generally keep it as an open space type setting.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I see Councillor Stutter joined the meeting. Welcome. Seeing nothing on the first 3, Wei, you or Councillor Mason, you have another couple minutes before you leave. Do you want to try to do number 4?
I think procedurally, sorry, it's the Model United Nations kidding me. I think we have to vote on these before I put anything else on the floor as an amendment.
No, sir. I mean, number 4 of what you put in.
I could read it, but I don't think I can put it on the floor until we dispense with the amendments that are already there. So like if we do a vote real quick, I can fit it in. Yeah,
you only read those 3. Okay.
Yeah, question on the main motion or on the amended motion on the floor.
Question, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Aye.
Thank you. So we'll do number 4 and then maybe go to another member so you can speak up for a bit.
Thank you for the indulgence. So I think we were in receipt of a letter from the folks in the Yonge Avenue area. So I'm going to make the following amendment. Amendment 4, such that relaxed allowance for built form on Young Avenue sub-area A outlined in sections 85, section 236A be deleted. The proposed setback of 8 meters, 26 feet as prescribed in the land use bylaw schedule 18 be deleted, and the 12-meter front yard setback be maintained, and the unit count allowed in Young Avenue sub-area A be increased to 5 units in new compliant structures. I so move.
Seconded. Second by Councillor Cleary.
Yeah.
Councillor Mason.
So this one is complex because I understand, I don't think we should be negotiating with someone who buys something, tears it down, and then tries to bully us into allowing development that they've been told repeatedly would never be allowed. And so that being said, I'm not entirely giving the area residents what they requested in their letter if we pass this, if we recommend this to council. And there'll still be options. I haven't had a chance to speak to them because I just did this afternoon, but they'll still have opportunity to speak between now and the actual regional council meeting and public hearing. But the intent here is, no, you have to build what we decided when we amended the zone just 4 years ago. It has to be the same size. It has to have the same front yard. It has to have the same size side yard. It only gets 35% lot coverage or 40% lot coverage. Doesn't get 50 like was proposed. But the key thing I think that would allow a developer to decide to build buildings on Young Avenue that look like homes but are multi-unit and kind of fit in with what used to be there before they were so tragically torn down is the unit count. So I'm actually proposing to increase the unit count where they asked us to drop it to a single family home. And I'll just say, I don't think anyone's going to build a house that big. A 35% lot coverage on an 8,000 square foot lot is a giant home. And I'd love to see 4 mansions built there for a lot of reasons, but I just don't think it's going to happen. The economics aren't there. That's not, people are building houses like that. They're building them other places. And so what was there before these houses were tragically torn down by the proponent was, ironically enough, 4-unit building and a 5-unit building, houses that have been converted into 5 units. So this is restoring the rights, in my mind, that used to be there and potentially enabling development that makes more sense for there than the subdivision and grandfathered 13 small homes that are currently allowed to be built. So under an ER1 zone, those houses would be allowed to have backyard suites. So it's a matter of trying to balance out the unit counts to make it so there's an economic reason to go with the bigger houses that match what the street historically looked like instead of the smaller houses. So I know this is not what the developer wanted, and that I'm not apologetic for that. I know it's not what the residents want. I am sorry for that, but I feel that this is the best way to get us to a result that I think we can all live with and get that empty lot that's been sitting there for several years filled. So I would ask for community council's indulgence to put this forward to community council for consideration, or to regional council for consideration.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Councillor Cuttle.
I guess the unit count is one tool. I'm just wondering about what are the controls regarding the look and form of the building. I mean, it's one thing to have a 5-unit apartment building. I'm thinking of that one just up off Oxford and near Oxford and Quimpool, that very much looks like an apartment building with maybe 6 units in it, versus something that fits the kind of existing built form. I mean, is there any controls in there for built form?
I think Ben can speak to that, but the special area that they've proposed has controls around cladding and material and stuff like that. Perhaps staff could clarify.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Councillor Macer, and through Mr. Chair, back to Councillor Cuttle. Say my name too. Ben Seabeck, Community Policy Program Manager. So the land use bylaw contains a number of controls to make sure, essentially, the building will contain more than multiple units. That still needs to look like as if it's one large single family home. So some of the controls that I think Councillor Mason in his motion would be maintaining would be the one front door, pitched roofs. Making sure that parking is only at the rear and only so much surface parking allowed, that not usual requirements in a low density area, and also control to make sure that the buildings are all unique. They don't look like they're not all the same building over 3 or 4 buildings all in a row all looking the same. It's different looking buildings, substantially different looking buildings. So I think those are probably the main controls. And in addition to like the lot requirements and the large front yards would be the attempt to make it look like the rest of the streetscape.
And you said you mentioned materials as well. That there's prescribed materials or banned materials. How does that work?
Thanks for the question. We're going from memory. I can double check. I don't think we do control for materials. It might be a prohibition on vinyl siding, but if it is one that we can look at. In the low density areas, we generally don't control for materials. It's more about the form, and I guess we're less worried about unfinished buildings or things like that to allow for that variation. So I don't think materials specifically are controlled. It's more about the roof pitch or the single door, and the location of parking would be the main controls.
Thank you.
Any further comments from members? Seeing none, I wonder if we call for the question on number 4.
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Aye.
Counselor, you have some extra time. Do you want to continue or do you want to move on to another member?
I can just power through if the
Sure.
committee will indulge me. That'd be great. So next would be such that PID 000-65177, 000-65185, and 000-65193 on South Bland Street may be considered, subject to the findings of the Halifax Granary Study, to be allowed a zone of HR 1 20 meters. I so move.
Moved by Councillor Mason, second by.
Second, Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you. Councillor Stoddard seconded. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Councillor Stoddard. So there are 5 converted houses that are 3 stories tall and have multiple units between the across from the granary lofts on South Bland Street, and wrapped and the only property they touch is the Halifax Curling Club wraps around them with a non-conforming legal industrial use. And then there's the proponent's own property on English Street that's in the proposed HCD for that area. And they've asked if they can redevelop those properties to be apartments, similar to the ones across the street. And I'm inclined to say yes, but staff have prevailed upon me that there's a real concern about the grain elevator being raised by the Port Authority, because grain elevators explode. Like there's no, I was trying to find a nicer way to put that, but they can explode. And in fact, I think I've told some of the people on this call, when my daughter was at Allegro Daycare on Victoria Road, I had to go and get her the last time, a long time ago, because she's 21 now, that the grain elevator was on fire. And because they thought that as far away as Victoria Road would be seriously damaged, they evacuated the whole area south of about Queen Street, Sobeys. So I don't want it to be in the land use bylaw that these people can never be considered for that. But now, unfortunately, is not the time until the granary study is done. And I guess I want to ask staff, for the comfort of the property owners in the area, because there's many that are affected and have been calling me, what kind of timeline do we have on that granary study being done? Because people don't want to wait decades. They'd like to know that that's going to be done some reasonable time. So do we have an idea what that technical study comprises and when it could be done?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Mason, and through Mr. Chair, back to you. We're in discussions right now with the Halifax Port Authority. So the funds are budgeted for this year, for this fiscal year. So we're hopeful that we can get the study off the ground and complete it this fiscal year. It requires a partnership, because the Port Authority has their expertise and their information about the green area operation, where we have our own expertise about the land use planning component of it. So it's we're very much working in partnership with Port Authority staff. And at this point, I guess the short answer would be expect to complete it this fiscal year. Although nothing is set in motion just yet.
Okay. Satisfies me. I was inclined to come in here and just try and get it up zone, but until we know whether they can actually build there anything substantial there or not, I think we should wait. So ask for support for this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I just have a question on process. I mean, if we're kind of waiting on the study and we move this forward in package B, but we don't have, I just don't understand how that works in terms of the timeline. I mean, couldn't we just come back and amend package B? Why would we do it now?
I can speak to why I'm suggesting doing it now is because I want it in the record that it's something council considered, and also I want it in the record for the developer why they're not going to potentially get what they want right now. So we're not actually approving it today. We're asking Halifax Regional Council to consider, and then staff will come back with a supplementary report, and they may say you really shouldn't do that, council, and here's why. And I will support that if that's what comes back. They've asked for it. It seems reasonable. But I think that we need a documentary trail for them to point to when the green elevator study is done.
Okay, so there would be, when it does come to council, there would be an opportunity to dive into this a bit more about what is actually being asked for, if it's appropriate, and consideration of the surrounding properties.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from members? Seeing none. Yep. Questions been called. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. All right. Moving on to number 6.
I move to allow the height of 20 meters on the lot shared by civic addresses 6136, 6131 Coburg and 1532 Vernon to better align with the height transition between the 10-story buildings flanking the site at La Marchand Tower and the Carlisle, and the HR1 20-meter zone applied to the Capitol building across the street. I so move.
Second, Councillor Cleary.
Second by Councillor Cleary. Moved by Councillor Mason, second by Councillor Cleary. Questions or discussion?
Yeah, I just, it seems reasonable to me. I never thought I'd even bring this, to be honest. And the developer did ask for the 2 houses in the ER2 zone that they own immediately adjacent to be rezoned HR as well. And I don't think that's appropriate. But the houses on the corner are 4-unit duplexes. It's all one PID now, but it was developed as separate properties. And they are not great. They were built in the late 80s, early 90s. They're predominantly student housing. They weren't built particularly to a high standard, and the developer has expressed interest in redoing that entire block with something that I think, based on the other work that he's been involved with, would be much better. And I certainly think the neighborhood would be materially improved by it. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of concern about that. But right now it's zoned, I think 14 there. It's HR1 14 meters, which most of that street is 11 or 14. But again, across the road at the new Capitol building is HR20, and either side of it are towers that are 10 stories tall. So I'd ask council to allow this to go forward for consideration.
Any comments from members? Seeing, Councillor Cuddle, yep.
Just that I agree with Councillor Mason, and I know those buildings, and I think I'll support your motion here.
I got to give them a little height to get rid of them. I think that's fine. Anyway, question?
Question's been called. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
All right.
Final.
Sorry, go ahead. Final one. So this is a brand new one that came in today, and staff might laugh about this off camera. To provide clarity as to whether the intent of section 37.1 or 371.4 is that each and every 8-meter section of a street wall articulation be completely different from all the others in the same building, and a rewrite if that's not the case. I so move. I tried to find, thank you, Sean. I tried to find a more businessy way, but I'm tired. I've run out of brain juice. I've been doing center plan literally for almost the entire day. And basically it was pointed out that 371.4 before, the way it's being interpreted by the development officers and the way it could be read is that every single 8-meter articulation has to be totally different on the same building from the other, rather than having different articulation in a pattern or, whatever. So I always thought when we approved that the intention was to make it more like Bishop's Landing or something like that, where you've got a couple of motifs that repeat throughout the building, but it changes every 8 to 12 meters in Bishop's Landing. And I don't think the idea was that if you have a 64-meter frontage, that every 8 meters it has to be entirely totally different. So this is an opportunity for staff to clarify what the intent is and if some wordsmithing is required there, because apparently that's how it's being read. So I ask council's indulgence on that.
Great. I don't know if any comment, because this is a newer one, you mentioned Councilor Mason, if the staff have any comments on that, or just as they'll respond when they come back. I'm not sure, Ben, if you have any comments on that at all.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you back to Councilor Mason and the rest of the committee. Just to clarify, my understanding, I think that our team's understanding is that the intent of that regulation is to be differentiating from next door, so not 8 different patterns on the same building. It could be 2 going back and forth. So I'm surprised that it's being interpreted that way. So I think if you're hearing this, it makes me a little bit concerned. So I think we'll check in with our staff who are administering the bylaw to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. If we need to clarify those words, then that would be a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Cottle.
I do think this is a really important point, because the intent here is to make sure we don't end up with large monolithic buildings. I don't know if the answer is that you have 2 alternating patterns. How far can 2 alternating patterns go? Is that appropriate? I think you need to really go back to what the intent of this was, and understand if the rules are in place or achieving that intent. So, I wouldn't jump too quick to the solution without really trying to understand why this is in place, what we're trying to achieve, and really look at all the different scenarios in which it could be applied to make sure we're getting it right. Because I do think that there is some value in this building requirement. But I also think that it needs our urban design. We need to get it right. It's important.
Great. So seeing nothing further, call for question.
Question.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. So that is all of your potential changes. Councilor Mason, is there anything further?
No, thank you all so much for the indulgence, and I'll be here until 7 o'clock.
All right, sounds good.
So,
Councilor Clary, would you like to go next?
I would. And before I do, I've got several amendments, but I also have questions. And I apologize, Mr. Chair. My first question is actually in your district, so don't take any offense. I'm not going to move a motion. I just have a question. But for staff, when I look at the zoning map on Hunter Street, on the west side, moving up from the Olympic Center to Civic 2360, it's zoned ER2. Let me just double check when I click on it. Yeah, it's zoned ER2. But those buildings, so there's a development agreement in the old, or a proposal or an application that came in the old camera repair center. And then you've got 1, 2, 3 fairly large multi-unit residential buildings. And so why, if we have many large multi-unit residential buildings going from 4 units to 20 odd units, why would we zone that ER2 and not HR?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councilor Cleary, and through Mr. Chair, back to you. And Kasia, if you might want to jump on as well, I'm going to provide a general answer, but you might have more specifics to share, or Eric as well. But in general, when it comes to placing the HR1 into kind of low density neighborhoods, we kind of tried to balance, is it a one-off in the middle of a neighborhood, or is this part of a pattern, or is it a substantial enough building that warrants the HR1 zoning? So, going from the direction from the purple document, from the guiding policy document, a building was allowed in a necessarily doesn't necessarily set a precedent. So in this case, the recommendation is that the area is generally a low density area. So these buildings are more the exception than the rule, protected by the relaxation of non-conforming use provisions. Very easy to redevelop to a low density dwelling, but not necessarily enabled to expand and recognized as HR1. That's kind of the general answer without knowing the specifics. And Kasia, if you have more details about this particular street, then I'm sure Councillor Cleary would, and the rest of the committee would like to hear it.
Thanks, Ben. Through the chair to the Councillor Cleary, we can definitely look at this, a little bit closer if directed. But I think Ben covered it very well. There are many instances where there are some various size multi-unit buildings in otherwise ER2 or are previously R2 zones. So we didn't want to set a precedent that it's okay to move forward and rezone further properties within the block, because I think the conversation with CDEC has been largely about minimizing changes to package A, but also allowing for these non-conforming uses to exist, to be rebuilt, to be repaired. There's actually quite a lot more flexibility than what exists in the charter for these buildings. But on the street, I see there are probably at least 2, if not 3 of such buildings. So but there is flexibility.
I believe that these buildings, at least one of them that I know of for sure, but probably all 3 of them, are under development agreements. So those development agreements continue because they're contractual agreements between the city and property owners. And so my understanding is what we're doing now is you can get a development agreement for a non-residential use, but for people who already have development agreements, those would continue, obviously, but can they amend those to do anything different? So, for example, if someone wanted to change dramatically, because, I mean, frankly, some of these buildings look, to look at the facade, they look circa 1980s. So they'll probably be there for another decade or 2 without probably much modification. But at that point in time, if they did want to do something different, could they amend those development agreements to do something substantially different, or would they be kind of locked in to what they have or less than what they have?
Ben, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Cleary, and Kasia, you might want to make sure I'm answering this correctly, but it through the transition policies in the short term, there's provisions to allow existing development agreements to be amended based on the old policies. That was put in place in package A, and proposing to extend it by 1 year, and proposing a similar framework for package B. So within the short term, I believe there's an opportunity if they wanted to amend those development agreements under the old policies, then that's a possibility. But longer term, 10, 20 years out, then there wouldn't be an opportunity to amend. You'd have to work with the existing plan. So the buildings would be allowed and grandfathered, but there wouldn't be, if there was zoned ER, they wouldn't be able to expand when you get into that time frame.
Okay. No, I appreciate those answers. I just was trying to figure that out because there's a few pockets here and there, and this is representative of one where you have fairly large multi-residential buildings that are zoned ER, when HR would probably be more appropriate to recognize what's there. But I understand what you're saying in terms of the overall neighborhood. So I'm fine with that. It was more of a question, as I promised Councillor Smith, I wasn't going to move a motion for those ones. But I do have a motion, so I'm just putting it in the chat now.
So really quickly, do you have a few of those, right? I
do.
So because we started with questions, I'm just wondering, before we go into motions, are there any other questions from other members? General, just general questions for staff on the overall plan, and if not, we'll go right into getting those done.
I had a question. I don't mind waiting to go through this.
if the committee doesn't mind us just going through each member, then that's fine too. I just want to make sure that everyone doesn't feel like they didn't have a chance to ask their questions ahead of time.
Well, Sean, how many things do you have?
I've got 5. So if you want to ask questions, go ahead. I'm here all night.
So am I. No, it's just about the plan. I'm happy. You go ahead, Sean. I want to hear your questions too. So I'm good.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so my first motion, and I apologize, Haruka, I'm gonna email you these as I'm going through them. They're short, so you could probably copy them also. So Halifax, so my motion is that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw, proposed is in there twice, I apologize, to zone 3 properties from 6994 to 7018 Churchill Drive as ER3. Hopefully someone will second that.
Second, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor Mason, second.
So these ones are in the Flynn Park area, and these 3 properties are 4-unit, 4-unit, and 6-unit buildings, and they're, I don't want to say coming to the end of their useful life, but they're not the prettiest buildings that you might see. And so one of the changes we made, so when the first draft of center plan came out, ER2 zones and ER3 zones had townhouses allowed within them. The latest draft that's come to CDAC and now to us, and we'll go to council, has only ER3 zones allowing townhouses. So these 3 lots, and I've talked to the property owner, and they put a request into our planning staff, and our planning staff recommended against them. But one of the reasons they recommended against them was at the time, as of right with ER3, you could have ground floor commercial uses, but we've actually since stripped that out. And so if you want to have ground floor commercial uses in an established residential zone, regardless of the zoning classification ER3, 1, 2, you actually have to go by development agreement. So the community gets a say in what type of commercial use might be in any particular neighborhood. And I think that's appropriate. But as a result, the only difference now is the form. And I think these lots are deeper than any other lots on the street. They're wider than almost all the lots on that particular street on that side. And this would be to simply recognize the density that's already there in those properties. And if they're going to be redeveloped, one of the forms that I think is actually appropriate for this particular area would be townhouses. But those would not be allowed under the current zoning, but ER3 would allow that zoning. And the main concern from staff in terms of the commercial use is no longer an issue. And so that would be my pitch, that with these ones, they'll probably stay here for a period of time. But if they get redeveloped, I think 2 rows of townhouses would actually be appropriate for this particular area. And I'm continuing to talk because I'm allowing people, if they want to go to Google or Viewpoint or some other, the center plan map, to find them, to look at them. But anyway, that would be my pitch, that these go to ER3 for that reason.
All right. Any comments from members? Councilor Cottle.
You're muted, Patty.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, you're right there on the park. It's kind of a short segment of street between Patricia Street and Flynn Street. You know, I think that's an interesting idea. I guess my only question is that when we're diving into this, we're getting very specific around, you know, a certain number of lots. Like, would you extend that the entire block, or just on those properties there? Like, why wouldn't you go to 6976? Just out of curiosity.
I would certainly, if you wanted to extend it the entire street or a bigger portion of the street, I'd certainly be open to that. These particular properties are owned by the same property owner. So it seems to me that if someone's going to redevelop them, they already own them, they could easily do that. The property to the west, and then the property actually just one west of that is also a multi-res. I think it's 3 or 4 units in there. And so if we wanted to extend it down to that second property, I'd be okay with that too, because again, we're recognizing the kind of the built form is not going to change tremendously. They still have to be established residential. So they're going to be, single family homes, duplexes, or townhouses. And, depending on how they do it in terms of subdividing the property or doing condos or whatever, or rentals, they may consolidate lots or subdivide lots. But the issue for me would be either for the whole street or at least a portion of the street. I think we need to recognize the densities that's there and then give options for redevelopment that are still keeping with that low density established residential character.
Right. And why would you do townhouses and not what we just did on Yonge Avenue, where you might build a larger multi-unit building that looks like a single family home to fit into the local context?
They could do that. The difference with Yonge Avenue is that that is now considered a heritage streetscape, or whatever the terminology we use, because it's that Beaux-Arts kind of feel to it that Yonge put on it back going into the Point Pleasant Park. And those properties now, correct me, Councillor Mason, but we've expanded the frontage that's required on those. So there's a minimum street frontage that's required that's much larger. 80 feet.
Yeah.
And so that wouldn't be the same in any other zone other than Yonge Street, just because of that Beaux-Arts style that it was originally designed as a promenade going down to the Point Pleasant Park. So it's very different from Yonge Avenue in that sense, but I'm fine too. I mean, the only trouble is only the cluster housing zone would allow for, in general, that kind of, large mansion with multiple units in it in that sense, other than kind of Yonge Avenue where they're allowing bigger, well, because the lots are bigger. But anyway, maybe Mr. Sivak or Ms. Cash could, or Toda could answer those much better than I could.
Thank you, Councillor Clear. I'll take that cue and provide a bit more commentary on that one. I think just for compare and contrast, the Yonge Avenue area is very much identified as kind of unique special area with these unique lot considerations and setbacks and the various other controls. Is also identified as a proposed heritage conservation district. So there's a reason why there's some special controls for Yonge Avenue area. In this case, just to specify some commentary on the ER3 zone, we in this draft we generally took a fairly cautious approach because of the feedback we received. So we tried to target it towards transit areas and also areas where there was to reflect some existing permissions. And I think what we're learning through Councillor Cleary is that there's already an existing built form in this area and some existing exceptions for this stretch of street that I think that staff could look into, and could be a rationale for applying ER3 zone here to match some of the existing permissions. We generally aren't trying to take away options from property owners where the existing plans already allow for multiple low density units on the same lot.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. I mean, I'm just wondering, let's see, that one building has 6 units in it. Like, how much more would be achieved through the ER3 zone? And my other concern would be around the built form and how it blends into its existing neighborhood. But your motion is that we consider amending. So would that mean that staff would come back with some additional information on that for us to consider?
I'll take it as a question, Councillor Cuddle, through Mr. Chair, back to you. Yes, mirroring what happened with the Package A process, we're expecting to get a number of different recommendations from this community council. Harbour East Marine Drive already passed a number of motions, and we're expecting more from the various committees. All these recommendations are going to come together for discussion at committee of the whole. As part of that, we're preparing a supplementary report and providing commentary and recommendations on all the recommendations. So you may find the 2 recommendations are coming at the same issues maybe from a different angle. And so we'll do our best to kind of reconcile and provide some commentary for all of regional council to provide the kind of the final direction on and if and how to amend the plan for these particular sites and also some of the more maybe overarching policies.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments from members?
So the chair, if I could just add very quickly, so just clarifying that the ER3 zone would permit up to 3 units on the lot plus secondary suites. So it's not just a townhouse form, it could actually be like a larger home with multiple units on the same lot as well. That's the only clarification. Thank you.
All right. Not seeing any further questions. Call for the question on the first motion.
Question.
Questions are called. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right. Councillor Cleary, next one.
So I just posted in the chat that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw to increase height limit to 38 meters on the HR2 block bounded by Shabukto Road, Clinton Avenue, and Joseph Howe Drive.
Moved by Councillor Cleary, seconded by Councillor Stutter. Thank you.
And so just quickly on this one, this is down by the Armdale roundabout. And actually, this was one, for some reason, it didn't get included in this section. So when we were doing package A, I actually put a request in for supplementary information when package B came back for this particular area to look at increased height, because it's at 26 meters now, but this particular area around the rotary is actually in the lowest dip. If you think of yourself coming down Shabukto Road where the Esso gas station is, this is the Armdale Professional Center and the Scotia Bank that's there. And with the HR zone, we require some parking. It's limited, but it's a ratio of 1 to 3. So for every 3 units, you have to have a 1 parking space. The property owners that I've talked to here have indicated with the analysis that they've done so far, they can't actually do underground parking because the water table is so high and the flooding in the area is such that you couldn't go underground. And so they would have to do above ground parking and wrap it in such a way that it looks like part of the building, which means at say 7 or 8 stories, half the building would be parking and the other half would be residential. And that just doesn't make any sense from that point of view. When I talked to Eric Lucic about this, going back to 2019, they had no problem with increasing this, but for some reason, and I'll get maybe staff like Mr. Sivak to talk about this, it didn't come back to us in my motion to look at this. So I'm putting it back in now for us to send it back to Community Council to look at this with additional information. And again, with 38 meters, you're looking at, what would that be? 80. So we go to 10 stories-ish from, or maybe up to 12 stories from the 8 stories that's granted with the 26 meters. And there's the Manulife building. There's a 32-story building being built down the street. We've just zoned the other side for 26 meters and higher. And so it doesn't make any sense to not give additional height to this because of the unique circumstances for this particular property. And anyway, so I put that on the floor because this was something that I did 2 years ago, but didn't come back to us. So hopefully this time it'll actually go to regional council with some more information about, you know, if we should increase this to 38 meters.
Any questions from members at all? Councillor Sutton?
Hi. Just a quick question. You were talking about parking earlier. With the increase of height, would there be an intention that they would have more parking, or would it just stay the same amount?
So it would be a ratio. So for every 3 units they add, they would have to have 1 parking spot. So if they add more units, there would be more parking spots.
Yeah. Did they really have the room there for more parking though? It's kind of limited as it is. Mm-hmm.
Well, and so that's why with the small amount of height, if you're doing above ground parking in a parkade style in the bottom of a building, you're very limited in actually how many residents you could put on that property as a result of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the councilors? Two quick questions from me. You mentioned that they couldn't go underground parking. Why was that again?
So the property, if you imagine the arm, and if I don't know if you've seen pictures from, I don't know, about 10 years ago, when people were canoeing around the rotary. So when we get storm surges, which is why one of the reasons why we're actually increasing the walls around our properties on the arm by a meter, it floods. And so with the property, because at that part of the rotary where Shabukto comes down and meets, it's the lowest part of the land around there. And so if you dig underground, you'd be digging into the water table and you'd be flooded all the time.
Right. And this is I'm assuming this is probably from an engineering study that the landowners did when they were looking initially, when you first asked for it, back when.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the only question, because staff would go and look at this, do we want to say up to 38 meters, or do you want to go right to 38 meters because that's the analysis that, or the height that was asked for?
That was the height that was requested because that's the maximum height in an HR2 zone that we allow.
Okay.
So staff may come back and recommend a lower height in their supplementary report, but that would be the max that would be allowed in HR2. You can't go higher than that in HR2.
So do you want to put up to 38 meters? Just think that gives them some leeway to, because they could say technically you can't do 38, so no to this. But if we say up to 38, they might say, well, actually 32 would make sense for whatever planning reasons. It's a small change, but.
Yeah, as a friendly, that's fine by me.
Okay. So friendly would just change it to increase height limit to up to 38, or sorry, up to 38 meters on the HR2 block bounded by Shabukto Road. That's friendly. Okay, so if there's no other comments from members, I'll ask for the question to be called.
Oh, I think Catherine.
Councilor Morse.
Yes, sorry. Just clarification. Was this a really rare flood that happened, or is this going to be a fairly common thing to have floods at the Rotary?
There hasn't been one since.
Yeah.
Knocking on wood.
Yeah.
But you know, with the increase in ocean heights.
Yeah. I guess it's almost like building in the coastal zone, right? And so I'm wondering if it needs to be recognized somehow that that's a risk that somebody is deciding to take.
I wonder if our staff can speak to that, because we actually have controls for coastal sites.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to comment, Councillor Clary, and through Mr. Chair, back to the committee. Yes, absolutely. We do have what we call vertical coastal setbacks for this very reason. So we recognize that we are a coastal city, and the coastal areas are some of the most desirable places to be. Since through the regional plan, we already have controls about new residential units needing to be above a certain elevation above the I guess the sea level. That's to accommodate both sea level rise and storm surges. So it takes into account both. Through package B, we're proposing to include commercial and institutional uses into that, so that whereas under a regional plan you could have a kind of commercial ground floor and then residential above, we're proposing the whole building, aside from parking areas, which can be evacuated and can be managed. All the kind of uses where people are going to have to be above the elevation. So that's one way that we're using planning controls to mitigate those impacts. And I'll just note that there's also the province is working on regulation. So it's probably an ongoing conversation that these rules are being reviewed and perhaps updated regional wide in the coming years. But it is a recognized area of concern, and that's why we have those controls in place.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuttle.
Yeah, further to Councillor Morris's comment, I mean, when we look at the floodplain mapping for this area, what is the risk here of flooding? And even if we're putting in measures to mitigate flooding of buildings by requiring them to be above a certain elevation, would there be an future environmental requirement of this block as a storm surge buffer, in terms of softening these edges around here rather than hardening them?
Thanks for the question through Mr. Chair. Back to you, Councillor Cuttle. Off the top of my head, I know municipality has various floodplain mapping and different studies. I don't recall the extent in this particular area, but we'll just note this. Should the community council pass this motion that as part of the supplementary report, I think it's clearly an issue that we should be looking into and to understand what the risks are before providing advice to council about whether or not heights should be increased in the area. So it is something that we'll do some digging and report back to council about. And just a quick commentary about softening the edges. Just to note that these are, I think, I guess there's a two-pronged approach when you're kind of dealing with risk of sea level rise of coastal problems. It's the type of controls and regulatory tools that we can use to make private developments adhere to certain rules. So that's the vertical coastal setbacks is the big one that I just pointed to. But then there's like the public work side of things, the municipal investments we might make in our own infrastructure, raising seawalls, strategic acquisitions of property, or other things that are the other side of those tend to be more costly, but also involve more cooperation and study and thought. So some of that work is ongoing at the municipality. But what I can speak to most right now is the requirements we put on the private development. But in any case, should community council pass this motion, it's clearly a topic we need to look into this area before providing advice about it potentially increasing heights in the area.
Right, and do we need to put that into this motion at all, or is that just something staff will take away and make sure they include in the report?
Through Mr. Chair, back to you. If council wanted to put it in the motion, that would certainly draw some attention to it. But I think even this discussion and just I think even in providing advice, we always look at the context. So I don't don't feel obliged to put it in the motion, because I think we will report back on it. But it wouldn't hurt if community council decided to do so. And anyways,
No, I trust you've captured this in some minutes and will be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments on this? Seeing none, call for the question on this motion.
Question.
Been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Seeing none. All right. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I realized I don't have 5, I only have 4. So that's good. So this one here is that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw to eliminate the West End special area.
Moved and seconded by.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Clear.
So this one here, I'll definitely get Mr. Sivak to comment on this one because he and I have chatted about this recently. There are several special areas in the regional center that have different controls on them. The West End special area used to have several controls, most notably the height, which has now been eliminated as a control. The only other control that's left is lot coverage. And so lot coverage in the West End special area is set at 35%, but we already have so if you look at the North End, if you look at the South End, you look at all the different aspects of the peninsula, most lot coverage is at 40%. And in fact, there's a clause in the land use bylaw that says if your property is under 325 square meters, you can have 50% lot coverage. If your property is more than 325 square meters, you can have 40% lot coverage. And so for the West End special area, it doesn't make any sense to have a special lot coverage when that already covers it. And there's really no distinction between, Klein Street, Dublin, Berlin, and Preston, Shirley, Pepperell. I mean, they're really the same areas. And so it's just doesn't make any sense to have one zone with one particular control that is already controlled by another clause within the land use bylaw. So anyway, I'll ask Mr. Sivak to maybe comment a bit about that one, but that would be one I propose because it just doesn't seem to make any sense to restrict it even further, because even the Young Street, which is huge lots, is at 35%. So you're talking about very large homes, whereas the West End, you might have a lot with 35, 40, 50, 45 feet of frontage. And we're saying basically you have a small lot, you have to have a tiny little home on it, whereas everyone else can have a 40 or 50% lot coverage.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Cleary, for the opportunity to comment through Mr. Chair. Back to you in the committee. Well, I think you captured it quite well in terms of what the topic is and the outlined rationale for proposed change. Something I would just add for committee members. So these special areas are identified to try to recognize the kind of the different development patterns in different areas. And for the West End Halifax, the only one that is identified is the lot coverage requirement, and that was simply to an effort to try to manage change, because right now I believe the lot coverage for that area is 30%, where it's 35% in other areas. Everywhere else we're increasing by 5, and so it's just to try to maintain that difference. But having said that, I think also Councillor Clear makes a valid point that the areas isn't all, when on the ground isn't all that different from the other areas. So we're talking about quite a small difference between 35 and 40%. And if councillors are comfortable with a little bit more change being allowed in that western area, a little bit more permission for maybe a backyard suite or an addition to the home, then removing that special area would be the way to do that.
Mr. Chair, if I may actually just add to and partially correct what Mr. Sivak said, only in the current Peninsula West Area 1, which is the area bounded by McDonald, Flynn, Roosevelt, and Shabukto, is it actually 30%. Everywhere else is 35%. So it was only that one small area, which was downzoned in 2003, that was actually 30%.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I'm sorry I got that. Sorry I got that wrong.
Thank you, Councillor. Any comments from members at all about this? Really quickly for me, Councillor Cleary or even Ben, removing this, are there any risks or is the potential of landowners saying, why did you take away, I don't know what that might be, but are there any risks that might be seen in the future because of removing this designation at all?
Thanks for the question. I'll give a go at an answer, and something that councillors might want to comment on, as well as other staff present. Through you, Mr. Chair, back to the committee. I think that there's kind of risk of both ways. So there's a risk of keeping the lot coverage low would mean that there's a risk that a reasonable proposal for a backyard suite or an addition to allow affordable housing option or something, types of development we want to see, wouldn't be able to go ahead because the lot coverage is lower than it is just could be just across the street or from another area of the municipality. So there's a risk of keeping it lower in terms of what it might prevent from happening. And then there's, I guess, the flip side is if you increase it, there's a risk that there might be some additions to the homes that at least in the view of some residents, wouldn't be in keeping with the character of the area. These special provisions are really about character. It's not about, there's no engineering requirement. There's no kind of, there's no like hard and fast or reason for it other than maintaining what is considered the character area, and that, of course, that perception of what that character is different from person to person. So the risk is that you could have a larger scale development than some residents are comfortable with, but the flip side, the risk of keeping the lot coverage low is that you're risking not allowing something that maybe we want to see in these areas.
Okay, I'm not sure, Councillor Clear, if you have anything else you want to add. Oh, okay, yeah, cool. All right, well, I don't see anyone else looking to speak on this item, so I'll ask for the question to be called.
Question.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Seeing none. All right. So I think that's it for you, Councilor Cleary.
I have one more.
One more. Okay, great.
Thank you for the indulgence of the Community Council. So the last one is that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw to increase height limit on 7137 Quinpool Road to 23 meters.
Seconded by Councilor Studd, Councilor Cleary.
Thank you. And so this is an interesting one. If you look at the map from Shabukto and Quinpool at the Rotary, it's 26 meters for those buildings as they come down, except for the one, of course, that there's a development happening under the old rules, which is going to be 32 stories high. So as you come down the road, it's 26 meters. And then when you get to 7137, it drops down to 14. And then it's 14 meters till you get to Lower Flynn Park. The building at 7137 is already a 4-story multi-unit apartment building. The building next to it is a multi-unit, I think it's 4 or 5 units, but it's a house type form. It's a large house. And then it's houses as you go down. So it makes sense that on those ones, you'd have 14 meters because they're already small on small lots. But this one is actually a fairly substantial lot that already has a 4-story apartment building on it. And so if we want redevelopment to happen here, and I know the owner is already looking with CMHC financing to look at affordable housing, although that's not a discussion we want to have here because we can't hold them to it, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, if we want redevelopment on some of these sites, this is not going to happen until it becomes economically feasible, which means when the building is falling down. And so what I'm proposing is to go from the 26 meters, step to 23, and then to 14 when you get to the house forms. And so at 23 meters, it's a little bit bigger than what's currently there, which would allow for redevelopment. And I think to have that step is appropriate too, because if you go from 26 immediately to 14, you have a large gap. Whereas if you have something filling in that gap that steps down, it'd be a more appropriate height for this particular property. So anyway, I put that out there and I thank Councillor Stoddard for seconding it and look forward to any comments that staff or our committee or council members have.
Thank you. Any comments from members? Not seeing any Councillor Cuttle, was that a hand up to comment?
It was. I think Councillor Morris might have beat me to the punch there. No, I mean, that seems to make sense. I mean, it's 23 meter. I mean, that could be a 6 to 7 story building. I would tend to want to stick to the 6 story and not the 7 story height there, just because I think you are transitioning down into those single unit homes along there. So I'm happy to support this going for consideration. But yeah, I do think, it is a 4-story going to a 6-story isn't a significant change in use, and I think would help blend in the streetscape, but I wouldn't want to see it much more than 6 stories.
All right, thank you. Councillor Morse.
Oh, just a clarification point, I guess. Are you saying that it would be somehow stepped on the same site, or how would you regulate the different levels of this proposed building?
No, so my comment would be that the properties from this property over towards the Rotary are already zoned 26 meters. And so it would be this property that steps down from the neighboring properties, and then the properties to the other side of it would step down from it. So it's just kind of this 26, 23, and then 14 as you move down.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments? All right, seeing none, call for the question on this motion.
Question.
Question is called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Seeing none. You have any more in the queue?
I'm done now, sir.
All right, thank you. So let's go. I have some as well, but I'll do mine at the end. So Councillor Cuttle, you said you had some general questions. You can do that. You can do that now.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And now I've got so many windows open here, thanks to Wei and Sean. I'm like, I don't know where my original documents went. It has to be in here somewhere. Yeah, so this was just a question for staff. You know, as I'm starting to go through the package in more detail, I did have questions about the wind, is it urban wind UW zone? I'm just wondering if that's new, and if you could explain a little bit about what the UW1 zone is, why we're permitting wind in some areas and why we're restricting it in others. And yeah, kind of, you know, what this is based on. I see this as a precedent, right? That we're going to like look at this zone. I don't think we have. I don't think we have this zone yet, do we? Is this like a new zone? We do have it.
Well, through I don't want to step over your own question, but on through the chair back to you. It's for clarification, the winds or to allow for wind energy developments, wind towers. It's carrying forward the existing region-wide provisions that were developed, I want to say about 10 years ago, maybe longer ago, to allow different scales of wind energy development throughout the municipality. So in the regional center, that means largely on our industrial zones, where it's allowed, and also small scale, you know, and small scale stuff on an individual sites. And so in the regional center, we're really carrying forward those region-wide amendments, not proposing anything new through this package B.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, from 10 years ago then to today, has there been advances in wind technology that could be scalable and appropriate in different areas?
Thanks for the question. Through the chair, back to you. Interesting question. It's a topic that I happen to follow. At this point in time, generally the economics of it is that it's the largest wind scale towers that are produce enough, that are competitive, and so that's why you're seeing offshore wind and large scale wind. The bigger the tower, the better. That's been the trend over the last 10 years. So you really haven't seen the small scale that I think we expected maybe to see 10, 15 years ago. Really hasn't come to fruition. Having said that, I do from time to time, I keep on reading about new technologies and new, you know, quieter approaches, things that look like flowers and other things that do different things. So time will tell on that. In the meantime, the region-wide amendments do provide opportunities. And as I suspect, as the technology changes, if there is a new kind of small scale technology that becomes popular, becomes economical, then those regulations very well might need to be changed. But at this point, it's kind of more permissive, allows for the opportunity, but the economics of it, the cost it takes to produce energy are generally, everything's trending towards the large scale wind turbines at the present time anyways.
All right, thanks.
Anything further, Councilor Cotto? Okay, thank you.
All for now. I'm sure I'll see Ben again.
Any other general questions for Mr. Setbacks or staff that are here? If not, I'll go to my list. Okay, seeing none, so I'm going to ask my esteemed Vice Chair, Councilor Morse, to switch spaces virtually and take the chair while I put forward my my pieces. Does that work for you, Councilor Morse?
Certainly. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to put mine in the chat.
Councilor Smith, I didn't hear Councilor Morse recognize you as the new chair.
Oh. That's fine. It's understood.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm going to put this in the chat. It might look like a lot of items, but most of these are actually related to each other. They're just on their own line. Ooh, actually, it might not let me put all of them. It's not. So I'm going to do half. And then the other piece. So I'll just do them in bunches of 3 because towards the end, they're pretty much all the same. That Halifax West Community Council recommend that Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaws and secondary municipal planning strategy for 1, change 2481, 2479, 2477, 2475, 2473, 2471 Brunswick Street from HR1 with a max height of 14 to a max height of 11. And 2, change 2396 Brunswick Street from ER1 to PCF, Parks and Community Facility. Actually, I'll stop there.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Thank you. So the first two, these properties on Brunswick Street are actually owned by what was a co-op and is still called a co-op, but it's affordable housing nonprofit organization. And these properties face Brunswick Street and they're currently townhouse use, and zoning them as HR 14 would allow those properties to be potentially in the future tore down to add higher density, which would be fine. But I know that within this area, with these being affordable units now, we want to continue to have these as townhouse style, especially being on Brunswick Street, and hoping that if they were in the future, the nonprofit was to sell those properties, that it would encourage the potential buyers, even if it's not affordable housing, to still consider having that townhouse style or low profile use, or not low profile, low mid-rise or low rise use on that street. And again, that's all these items I had discussion with staff, and they have no issues with that. So really, this is hopefully to protect that streetscape. And then also within this block, if you look at a map, there are some heritage properties that are zoned in between them. There's a potential property that's been zoned HR this time because the organization next door, which is a nonprofit organization, is hoping to do affordable housing, and they're already pretty far in the process. So keeping the low scale of 11 meters would just encourage those properties to stay that way, especially with being so near registered heritage properties. And then the next one is really just a mapping change. So this is 2396 Brunswick Street is actually the Little Dutch Church, and which has been around for I don't even know the date, but forever. I think it was the first church if not in HRM, that might have been in Nova Scotia back forever ago when the German settlers, I believe, came here. So this is just, it's zoned ER, where it should really be parks and community facility as other churches or institutions. So this is really, the number 2 is a correction, and number 1 is to encourage the continued streetscape of that block. So happy to answer any questions on that one.
Any questions? Councillor Cleary? No? Okay, let's call for the question then.
Question, please.
Question.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Okay, passes.
Thank you. So I'll do number 3 on its own, because this might spark some conversation. So staff review zoning between Charles Street, Buddy Day Street / Hare Street, and between Goddison Street and Agricola Street to assess their existing built form and uses to determine any potential adjustments.
Second.
So thank you, Councillor Cleary. So this one's a little bit more, it needs a little bit more staff analysis. And again, these have all been through staff. So this area has some very unique properties. It has some heritage properties, some registered, some not. We have mostly 2 to 3 story wood frame houses, but we also have housing. So we have provincial housing Oh my goodness. This week I have been terrible with words, but we have regional housing on there as well that has mostly low scale townhouse style properties. And we also on the corner have some of the properties have been changed from residential use to HR use, which doesn't really align with the current uses of those properties, which are mostly wood frame houses on that block as well. So really the goal is not to prescribe any zoning today, but to let staff take it back and do another more micro look at that area, because we want to make sure that we're not removing any rights for housing in case they decide to do some redevelopment in the future, but also making sure that we're protecting any potential heritage properties that might come online, but also protecting the form of the street, because it's mostly small scale, 2-story, 3-story houses. So not proposing any changes, but just want to make sure that staff do a microscope look at that area to determine if the zonings that we're proposing there match not only the current use, but match potential future uses, and it doesn't impact the community too much in that area. So that's that one more for review, and staff will come back and give some analysis and we can have a further discussion. But happy to answer any questions on number 3 as well.
Any questions? No, seeing none. Are we ready for the question?
Question.
On favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That one passes. Would you like to go to the next one, Councillor Smith?
Thank you. So this one here, conduct further analysis in the area of Nobley Drive between civic address 5521 Duffer Street and 3590 Nobley Drive to change the zoning from HR, it should be from, not to, from HR1 to corridor to allow current uses. So again, this one is for staff to look at. Thank you, Councilor Cleary. Seconded. So this is on the corner where we have the Lawtons, Casino Taxi, Pharmacy, liquor store, Domino's Pizza, bakery. So it's almost kind of like a small scale, we call them strip malls, but not really, area that also abuts some residential, but it's also on a large, Nobley is a large street, so we do want to encourage development there. But the concern here is if we were to keep this as HR, many of the current uses wouldn't actually be allowed, so they'd be non-conforming. So some of those uses that are within the HR1 would not be allowed. So we'd have businesses that are currently existing. If, say, the developer, the owner of that land was to redevelop that property, but then invite those property or those business owners to come back, some of them wouldn't be able to come back because it just wouldn't be permitted in the new use. So the goal is for staff to kind of take back, have a discussion. Maybe we keep it HR and allow other uses. Maybe we don't. Maybe it gets changed to corridor, which will allow the commercial uses, but also not take away the potential of having residential on that in case that is the case. So really this one is, again, is analysis for staff to look at and see what's the best type of use or best type of zone for that block, because I hate to see us zone it and then it get redeveloped and then some of those property owners or business can't come back because of a zoning. Because of the allowed uses within that area. So any comments from members or staff? Happy to address them. Yeah, Councilor Cuttle. Oh, sorry.
Force of habit. Councilor Cuttle.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what businesses wouldn't be allowed back under HR1?
So, and I knew, you know what? I knew that somebody would ask that, and I think I closed. Or maybe I
could ask Mr. Feedback for that question.
Yeah. So Ben, if you want to answer it, but I don't know. I'm not sure if Ben will know the current businesses that operate there today. But if you have an answer, that'd be great.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and happy to clarify that. I think that there's a few differences between the core and the HR1 zoning. First of all, just to clarify for committee members that the built form of the HR1 and core zone are actually very similar. There's some slight differences between the two, but it's the same transition requirements and some of the same built form. So the shape of the buildings isn't all that difference too. The main difference is the permissions and uses. So the HR1 allows for only up to 25% of the lot or of the building floor area to be used for commercial uses, only on the ground floor, and has a smaller list of permitted uses. So generally to local commercial uses, small scale things like convenience stores and hairdressers and things like that. Whereas the corridor is more of a full mixed use type zone where yes, you could have residential apartment buildings, but you can have like the Lawtons or grocery stores. I think some of the more intensive uses would be kind of a local drinking establishment and things like that. I think so. It's really the difference would be in the kind of range of permitted use, as well as the HR1 permits some small scale commercial uses. The corridor is more flexible.
Oh, okay. Well, absolutely. I support your motion, Lindell, because that is a commercial hub and a perfect place for a good mixed use development. So
exactly.
Good catch.
And really quickly, just to follow up, so grocery use wouldn't be allowed if we kept it as HR. Office use wouldn't be allowed. I'm just saying the ones that are currently there. Retail use wouldn't be allowed. And I think that's the only other one. Yeah, that's the only other one that would. So a few of the businesses that are there now wouldn't actually be able to continue if that was to redevelop. So again, hopefully this wouldn't be changing it today, but more analysis from staff as they go forward.
I think Councillor Cleary has a question on this.
Actually, Councillor Smith just kind of answered it. But I guess my one question to Mr. Sivak would be, so in that block, Peter Osborne has what's called the Village Green, where he repairs autos. And so that would be, regardless of corridor or HR, that would be non-conforming, correct?
Yes. Auto repair wouldn't be permitted in the corridor zone, but would be recognized in the existing non-conforming use and have the development green option to expand.
Yeah. So luckily, Peter's close to retirement. So.
Okay, are we ready for the question?
Question?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. I'll go to the next one.
Yes, please.
So change PID 00173856 from HR1 to a zone that recognizes the current municipal use.
Second.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you. I'm trying not to overstep my my duty here. So this is a small parcel that is on Massachusetts Avenue, going towards as you approach the McKay Bridge. So there's this slither of land that is our land that we've changed the zoning potentially in this package to HR. And there was petitions in the past during package A, which we accepted, but we didn't do anything with, because this was the time that for us to look at those properties for park use. So the community and the residents in that area would hope that this PID would be designated for park use or as park. But there's two things we have to recognize is that one, it's not really used as a park now, and because it approaches the bridge, I don't imagine anyone really would want to go to a park that's pretty much on a highway. But at the same time, there's lots of infrastructure that's under that park as well. So a lot of, we have Halifax Water, I think there's Heritage Gas, there might be some right away that's ours as well. So the goal is for staff to look at a zone that doesn't change it to high order residential, because it would never be, I shouldn't say never, it would be unlikely for it to be used as high order. And really, this is just something to help the residents that are there create some ease, because it's our land, and there's a good chance that we have to hold on to that for a long time because of all the infrastructure and right of way that's on it. So initially I was asking for it to be designated as park, but once staff did some analysis, they realized that there's so many other uses with that piece of parcel, it might be better to be zoned as something as institution or whatever it might be. So again, our land, we have no current use, but it is a right of way, it approaches the bridge, so it doesn't make sense for it to stay as HR1, because there wouldn't be any future development there.
Any questions on this motion? Councillor Cleary?
Thank you. So a quick question. Typically, and hopefully staff can either confirm this or correct me. Oftentimes, if we're going to sell a piece of municipal land, we will zone it for what we want it to be used as for whoever is gonna buy the property from us. So I think this is good in terms of housekeeping, because if it's HRM land, if we do decide to make it surplus and then sell it, we would zone it accordingly to whatever we wanted to sell it as. So I'm just looking for Mr. Sivak or someone else to say, yes, we generally do that when we sell land.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Cleary, and through the chair, back to you. I mean, the answer to that one is, I think historically it's been a bit of both, although I think we're trying in recent years to be more thoughtful about the zoning of the land and how it's planned before we dispose of land. I think in the past you can point to example where we've disposed of land where it's zoned as institutional. But in this case, I think based on Councillor Smith's inquiry, who's already started to ask some questions of our counterparts in different departments, and are discovering that there's different infrastructure under that land. So one option we're going to be looking into whether or not it actually be part of the road parcel, is actually considered a piece of the road. But I think to your point, Councillor, clearly, I think it's thinking ahead to what the intended long-term uses of that land and zoning it appropriately for that, regardless of if we own it or another entity own it, would be the kind of thinking, the analysis to put into it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Councillor Cuttle?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at it, it is looks like a green space right now, and sometimes parks aren't meant to be visited. Sometimes there's different types of parks, and one is a buffer, a gateway, an environmental use, all kinds of things. And in that particular area of Roby Street, it already is kind of hard, like a hardened area in terms of structures being built there and man-made interference. And I don't see any issue with leaving a bit of breathing space for green space and visual aesthetic and parks and trees and all the rest of it. So it certainly doesn't seem like we need to stick some higher order residential there. I would be interested in looking at whether it's the current use or park. I don't, not, and again, not a park that you're going to go visit with your kids to visit a playground, but one that serves a broader purpose.
We ready for the
notes?
I would, I'll just comment really quickly and call for the question that if I would love to keep this HR1 if we actually built housing, because this would be a perfect parcel for us to discuss. Hey, maybe we should put some affordable housing behind there, and then have that whole discussion around all this municipal land that we have that stays vacant that we could build properties on. So if we had that opportunity, I would probably have a different tune. But since we don't build housing, I asked staff to look at this. So if nothing else, I'll call for the question.
Question?
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sorry. So that carries. Next motion. Councillor Smith.
So I'm gonna do 3 because these are all just mapping errors that are. Yeah, these are just mapping errors. So 6379 Almond Street, mapping error, adjust to ER2. 6380 Edinburgh Street, mapping error, adjust to ER2. And 6324 and 6330 North Street, change from ER2 or ER3 to ER2.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Not much comment on these. One of these were ones that were recognized as just one of those things that were missed as we not missed. I shouldn't say missed. That we just weren't caught at the time. So I'll happy to talk about each one, but not much to say on these three.
Any questions? No? Shall we call for the question?
Question.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So it passes. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. So these last three are requests that have been brought forward to me, and I know we're getting some more last minute ones as we go, and we have some other opportunities at the regional center and regional council for additional requests if they're what's the word that we used earlier, Councillor Cleary, if they have
but we setting the bar incredibly high.
Right. So these are the ones that I felt were worth looking into now, and then if any other changes come forward, the bar will be high and really taking a fine tooth comb on making these changes. So these are requests from property owners. So number 9 is, and I'll put all three on. Number 9 is 6022 North Street, change from HR1 with a max height of 14 to max height of 17 meters. 10 5527 5531 Duffer Street, change from ER2 to HR1 with max height of 17 meters. And 11 5535 and 5545 Duffer Street, change from ER2 to HR1 with a max height of 14 meters.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Any questions?
So I'll just speak really quickly on these last three. So the 6022 North Street, so we got a request from the property owner to change it to HR. I don't remember what the old zoning was, but it was zoned differently from HR. So staff agreed that it should be HR because of the use. It's right across the street from Chicken Shop, from Java Blend, and on the corner, close to the corner of Roby Street, where the gas station is. And it's currently, I believe, a 4 or 5 story apartment building. And they'd hope that in the future they can redevelop it. And initially they were asking for 20 meters. And I think 17 is a good compromise because it does back on, or there's some South Residential that backs on that street, but this is on North Street, which is a very, very busy transit-oriented, pedestrian-oriented street. So I think it's appropriate to have the density there, but also making sure that we're considering the residential that's around it. So that's that one. And then the 10 and 11 are the same block. So the area that I spoke about earlier on Nova Lee, where the Lawton's changing that from HR to potentially corridor. If you go up Duffer Street, there's a block of houses that were purchased by one owner who was hoping to do a larger development, but kind of scaled back and really is hoping to have it as HR, but is interested in other designations. And when staff look at this, they might realize it should go somewhere else. But currently, with where the Lawton's property is, there's a little small piece of land that abuts Oates onto behind the 5527 Duffer Street and 5531. So technically, if the Lawton's property owner wanted to redevelop that as HR, they would have a 20-meter apartment or 20-meter part of the building that would be directly behind them because of just the way that that little piece of land butted out. So the owner is asking if we can do a 17, step down to a 14, and then that would then go into the established residential and go within the area. So, this is one of the ones again where I think the change is appropriate being asked for, considering of the area that it's in, considering the uses that are around. And this one, changing it from HR, from ER2 to HR is something that could have been done in package A, but recognizing that some of these changes make sense into doing it in package B, and other ones will have discussions as we go. So yeah, that's happy to talk a little bit more about those. And I know that staff has had discussion with the property owners on these and their submissions, that if there's questions I could send over. But yeah, those are my changes that I would request tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Now any questions? Councillor Cleary?
Just very briefly, so looking at both of these, so on North Street and Duffield, so North, it is a residential, commercial, high order, low rise residence. I mean, it's a mixed use. So I think compromising there on that property is pretty appropriate. And similarly here, I'm looking at the Duffield ones as you come up to Lawtons. And again, if we're zoning that corridor all the way back, or high order residential all the way back, again, it kind of makes sense to step it up to the corner there as things get redeveloped, because right now it's a parking lot with a pharmacy. And so, I have no problem with either of those, and I think they're probably appropriate for the neighborhood. One thing that could be considered, and I don't know if the property owner is looking at it, and even within high order residential, you're still allowed to do this. You could actually do a row of townhouses similar to what is across the street on the Hydrostones, because this is the last end of the Hydrostone area. So, I mean, that would be something that'd be allowed in high order too. So, I mean, it depends on what they want to do, but I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cuddle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I guess question for staff. I mean, you do have, this is referring to the Duffield properties there. I mean, I do have a little bit of concern because there is a character issue here with this neighborhood. In particular, along Duffield Street, it is predominantly a single family home area. There is I think there's a lot of character in this area as well in terms of the homes and the home types. And while you might have the high order residential in the corner of the Lawtons property, I mean, that is a giant parking lot and, a strip mall. So I think it's appropriate for some redevelopment and some density. What would the transition be between the higher order residential, the Lawtons building, toward the ER2 on Duffield Street? What was the requirement to step down? Like, will they actually have a 20 meter building in their backyard, or will that be required to be a setback and a step down?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Through the chair, back to you, Councillor Cuddle. Yeah, so the transition requirements would be, first of all, a 6 meter setback. So at least about 20 feet between any portion of the building and the lot line. And then above that, above the essentially above the street wall height, there'd be another step back above that. And I feel like I'm kind of going to misremember what that is, but only in a lower portion of the building would have to be could be located 6 meters away, and then the taller you go, the further back you need to be. So the 20 meters wouldn't necessarily be achieved right next to an ER zone property.
Yeah, correct. So I think that argument for changing it to HR1, I'd want to see some modeling or some assessment around that, because they're not going to have a 20 meter building right in their backyard. Just looking at that lot and the setback requirements, I don't that's not going to happen. And when I think about this, well, I do know we have goals around achieving density, and that we also want to be creating complete communities, character communities that have a sense of identity, a sense of place, and support a number of different uses. It's almost like those houses along there. There is some commercial on the next block there on the corner. I think there's like a further down, there's a gas station or what used to be a garage or something. And there's some pizza places and some houses there. I think it's almost what would be more interesting to look at, almost doing like what would be equivalent of a SEN 2 zone or something. But I don't necessarily support right away this idea of a higher order residential on that block, for the reasons I stated.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith, did you want to wrap up, or shall we call for the question?
No, I don't have much to add. In looking at this, and there's going to have to be a little bit of analysis done before we make the full change on staff's end. And even the corner of that Eyesville Industrial, there's a pizza shop there that property owner might want to be included in that as well. And the owner of these properties took these houses, which were at a point where they needed lots of investment, and the owner did put a significant amount of money into these properties and has very unique colors, and made sure that all the property renters within that were able to stay in there while they did the renovation. So they are interested in other forms, and as Councillor Cleary said, townhouse could be what they decide to build on there. But the goal is to provide more housing on that block, knowing that that's where it could be. And giving all the requests that I've received, and some of them I'm still having some further discussion, this was one of the ones that I definitely felt made sense for that corner. But there's some other ones where some of the comments that you made, Councillor Cuttle, I would be concerned of adding those in, like some of them are on very residential streets that have no transit, that have very little commercial, and they want to change those to HR1. So I was concerned with some of those type of characteristics, where this one I felt would make sense to change to HR with some transition. But yeah, that's really it. And if you don't support it, that's great. I will not put that against you. That is part of democracy. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I'll call for the question.
I did have one other part here. I mean, all of these houses here, I think a lot of them are already multi-unit, that they have apartments in them. They don't have secondary suites in any of the backyards. I don't know if they'd be able to have secondary suites on them, but I think they might. I mean, there might be other ways of achieving some density without losing the character. Because you have the Hydrostone, you got the Hydrostone right across the street. It is it's a kind of a historical neighborhood. Those houses have some heritage value. I agree the current owners have put a lot of effort into fixing those houses up and extending their longevity. But in terms of going from that to higher order residential, that's a big leap. As far as I'm concerned. So I don't know if we need to break out these. I don't want to support that at this point, and I don't know if that means we need to break apart these motions. The other one on North Street, I mean, that makes sense, that older apartment building. I think the height increase they're looking for there would be about a five-story building. Question for staff on that 5-story building. Is that 5 stories with a penthouse, or is that just clear height on that? Sometimes it gets confusing because you have a height limit and then you're allowed to add a little bit on top.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Cuttle, and to Madam Chair, back to you. The height limit speaks to the main rooftop, but you're right. There's a height we call height exempted feature. So a mechanical penthouse or a penthouse for amenities, not for residential uses. That's limited in size, could be above that maximum roof height, including other features like flagpoles or chimneys or mechanical equipment.
Right, so 17 meters. I mean, I know that the height of buildings, stories of building isn't a good kind of measure because it depends on how high your ceilings are. You could squeeze in into a 17-meter building. You could probably squeeze in, with an eight foot ceiling, it's almost a 7-story building versus, if you had a 11 foot ceiling height, you might get 5. But in general, like just, when we talk about a 17-meter building, we're looking at like how many, like 6 stories in general? Is there a general rule of thumb we use?
I'll answer that question, Councillor Cutler, through Madam Chair. Back to you. I mean, the short answer is yes. 5 or 6 for that height. It makes sense. It also depends on it's measured from average grade, so it really also depends on the grade of the land around the site and just how the units are configured. You say that the floor to ceiling height makes sense. How thick the floors are. So wood construction with timber frame is different than a concrete construction. But really, I think we had thought that 20 meters was generally 6 stories, and we're learning that oftentimes, depending on the site, you can fit in 7. So slightly less could be kind of more in the 5 to 6 range.
All right. So I'll support that one. So if we can divide them up, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, this is, I'm going to need some guidance here. So shall we hive all but one off, or what's the best way to do it?
You could split, Madam Chair, north, so that'd be number 9, and then number 10, 11 could be together.
Okay. So are we ready for the question on motion number 9? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That one carries. And, sorry, are we ready for the question on 10 and 11? Question. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And against? Councillor Cook. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Smith, is that everything?
Yeah, that's it for me. And if I can take a moment to just general comments, Ms. Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I've said this many times at other meetings. Thank you to staff for all the work. Honestly, going back and forth, and this even though this list seems a little bit longer, there was many more that I brought forward to them to have discussions around and questions that I had, and they were very gracious to help out with that analysis. The only thing that's outstanding, I'm not going to bring today, but it's just part of discussion that I'll probably bring at the regional center, but I think it's just important to note it. One of the concerns that I had looking at this plan, and I'll speak more to some other general things at regional center, but the potential of looking at how we negotiate heritage agreements. So we have and I'm just going to use it for an example because it's relevant. We have Victoria Hall, which is currently going through the process, and heritage property, and the owner is looking to get development rights in order to pay for the heritage preservation piece, which is going to cost within the millions. One of the issues with how we do the analysis now is we really take the heritage assessment report that's provided to us by the developer, and they say this is how much we want to invest. We need to invest $3 million, so give us height. But in between that, there's no conversation of, well, we need to invest $3 million. We need more height. This is why we need the height. talking about the performa, looking at the square footage that's needed, looking at the whole property, not just this is how much we're spending, so we need more, rather than having that discussion. So that's one of the pieces that I think, and I know I'll have more discussion with staff before we get there, but I did have concerns with how we will in the future negotiate these type of agreements, because we're going to probably see more of them since we are being pretty prescriptive with the center plan of what we want to see, and especially with the heritage designated areas that are coming online, there's going to still be folks who want to do development that are going to use heritage DA to achieve that. So that's just a general comment. Other than that, thanks to staff for all the work they've done on this, and I still, there's some more things that might come forward that might not, but I do appreciate all the work that's been done, and staff are always have been there to support those questions and help walk me through this crazy long process of center plan. So that's really it for me. I appreciate everyone helping and voting on my amendments, and that's all I got tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Can you take the chair back?
Just gonna throw it at me. Yes, that's fine. Thank you so much. You did great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Councillor Cleary.
I have a couple of questions for staff that relate to churches. One is actually in my district, one is in yours, Councillor Smith. So please indulge me for a moment. So I'll start with the one in my district, and that is the Anglican Church of the Apostles at the corner of Connaught and Bears. The exact address, give me 1 second here, is 6670 Bears Road, Anglican Church of the Apostles. It is, and this seems different to me than what was in the first iteration when this came to us a while ago. I'll say this, saying that all of the other churches that I've seen are zoned institutional. This one is zoned corridor, and that, it's consistent with Bears Road as it comes down. But what I've noticed is the old school property north of this and this property on the south are zoned corridor, in keeping with what's happening on Bears going down that way. So if staff could just answer, like, when did these properties get zoned corridor, and why is the church property, when all other church properties are zoned institutional, why did this church property get zoned corridor?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Cleary, and through Mr. Chair, back to you. And Kasia, if you're still listening, it'd be or Eric, if one of you maybe has a memory of the package A process on this one, it might be helpful to mention. But a general response is kind of what you mentioned, is that the corridor does permit places of worship. It's a prominent corner. It's a transit corridor. So implying the corridor zone, it of course continues to permit the place to worship, but keeps the options open in terms of potential reuse and redevelopment of the site. Whereas the institutional zone and other places of worship, oftentimes they're in low density areas, or areas that kind of define that neighborhood. That institutional zone provides a bit more protection in terms of what could happen next. And we also, I think we've discussed the different CDAC committees, the flexibilities about landmark buildings, and also potential for rezoning for those other properties. So it's kind of location, I guess, would be everything for the distinction between the two. And Kashar, it looks like your video is on. If you have particular recollection of when that was placed, if it was package A or any discussions in the past for that, or perhaps Eric.
Hello, everyone. Eric Lusick, Director of Regional Planning. As I recall, this was a package A property, so it does go back to the first package.
Because the map I was looking at didn't have it on it from package A when you look at those structures. Anyway, it's all good. So the other one is St. Teresa's Church on North Street.
Yeah.
Oh,
if I could just jump in, I apologize. And I hate to contradict Eric, but I was able to check the map, the online map from the approved package. So this wasn't in package A, in fact. So, and I need to probably dig through our various tables, but it may have been includes a corridor early in the first draft of package B, based on earlier request, I believe, from the church. So I may have to dig through it, but it was in the first draft of package B. Sorry.
That's right. So, sorry about that. I think I got confused as well. That's right. I remember because I do recall discussions with the church. Thanks for clarifying, Kasia.
Yeah, may have been the request in early days of package B.
Okay. And then, so the second one is St. Teresa's Church. So on North Street at the corner of North and Dublin. And I know because when I looked at the attachments K and L, the ones that staff recommended and didn't recommend in terms of property owners, because the church on the Apostles' Church isn't listed on this. So if it was a request from the property owner, I'm curious why it wasn't included in the attachments. But for St. Teresa's, I know the property owners, the church, the Catholic Church, they requested that their rectory building be zoned corridor, and staff disagreed with that. And I agree with staff that it's inappropriate for it to be corridor, but it was then zoned established residential. But the problem is that piece of property is all one PID. And so what you've essentially done is you've cut a single property in two in terms of zoning. The church building itself, you've zoned institutional, but the rectory, you've zoned ER. Why wouldn't you zone the rectory that's on the same PID, the same property as the church, all institutional?
Thanks for the question. And this is one that Kasia and I have been talking to the, I guess the representative, the landowner's representative who's inquired about this and made a similar observation as you.
Ben, I just want to interrupt real quick. Councilor Cleary, can you just make a motion to extend the meeting real quick?
I move that we extend the meeting past 8 o'clock.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Cuttle. Thank you. Sorry.
Question.
Question. Yeah. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none. Sorry, Ben.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. I thought I was doing something wrong, speaking out of turn, but no. Okay. Thanks. Anyway, so through Mr. Chair, back to you, Councilor Cleary. Through the later phases of the engagement process for package B, we did receive some requests, and I think you saw that, and did try to accommodate other portions of church properties that weren't actually the church building itself. And I think the effort to apply ER zoning was an attempt at what we thought was accommodating what the landowner was wanting, looking for different options for that area. For the reasons I think it probably you noted that the corridor zoning didn't make sense in that area. It was a jump from the corridor areas and would have been quite a change for that neighborhood. So the proposed ER zoning part, it was an attempt at a bit of a compromise to provide some options. Having said that, we'd have some further discussions with the representative landowners, and I think they're thinking it has changed. I think they understand why the corridor wasn't recommended, but to keep their options open, I think they would actually prefer institutional zoning over the whole property. So we're kind of waiting for confirmation from our contact, Cesar with WM Paris, and we'll see. And so we may have some further commentary on that through the supplementary staff report, or might see some. But if this committee wants to comment on this, we'd be open to that as well. Kasia, am I missing any details on this one from that you'd like to further add any commentary?
No, that's exactly it. You've covered really well. Nothing else to add. Thanks.
So given that, I did have a conversation with the representative for the property owner, Mr. Sala, and I'm going to put a motion on the floor that Halifax and West Community Council recommend that Halifax Regional Council consider amending the proposed land use bylaw to zone the property at 6331 and 6351 North Street, St. Teresa's Rectory, to institutional.
A second.
Thank you, Councillor Stoddard. So, and this will come back. I mean, now that I've put it there and it's going to come back to council, you'll put more information as it comes back to us. But I think just based on the fact that it is one PID and it is a church and a rectory, that it makes sense for them to have institutional on all of it, because that recognizes the current uses. And as you say, if they want to do something different with it, then it gives them some options, whereas ER2 would really lock them in terms of what and in fact, make them non-conforming on the rectory use as an institutional use. So anyway, I hope Councillor Smith doesn't mind so much that I did that, encroaching a few hundred meters into his district. But anyway, I think it's worth doing and worth looking at for it to come back to council.
Great. Any comments on that at all? I got a quick comment. Thanks, Councilor Cleary, for picking that up. I did see that correspondence, so I have no issues with you taking it on. The other property that you mentioned, are you fine with leaving that as is, or would you like to include that in a motion as well for that to be changed?
No, I think, I mean, I'm curious, and I'll follow up with staff on it, but I'm curious as to how it got in there, because it wasn't in package A and then it was in package B. But I agree with staff's analysis that particular corner, because as you come down Bears Road from the 102, you're on Bears, you've got the shopping center, you've got, you know, a number of residential uses, but then you also have a church, a gas station, multi-res buildings, you've got a funeral home, a Tim Hortons. So it really is a commercial strip. And I have no issue with that being there. I was just curious how it ended up there, given that it's institutional, it's a church. But I think moving it to a corridor is appropriate. I was just curious how it got there. That's all. So I appreciate that, Mr. Chair.
All right, great. So with that, ask for the question to be called. Question been called. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Seeing none. So that is the motions that I am aware of from members. Are there any last comments or questions for staff or motions that folks would like to bring forward? There are other opportunities that we'll see this for the regional center community council. We'll have an opportunity to have discussion as well. Then it will go to regional council. And many other committees in between that. So there's still opportunities to have discussions on potential changes if there are any. But with that, I think we can move on.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and other councillors may wish to do the same. And I know for many of us who have been on CDAC or other committees as this has been coming through, well, and for Councillor Mason, this has been an ongoing process since the downtown plan started, which was supposed to be center plan, but turned into downtown plan because it was just too big a bite to chew at that time. I want to express my gratitude to Kasia and Ben and Eric and Meg and all of the lawyers, the planners, the folks that have been working on this for years and years and years. I can remember before I was even a counselor in 2016 in the spring, summer, going to Citadel High School, looking at the boards and looking at, you know, what do you guys want? Do you want a lot of this or a lot of this or some combination of those things? And I think it was great staff set up, you know, the carpets for the kids with all the toys and parents could go. And so anyway, I just want to express my gratitude for the tremendous amount of work. I know one of our counselors made a comment about one of our planners looked very tired at CDAC last week, and it's true. And I was talking to Rosemary McNeil from a development officer from current planning. Just, you know, everyone in planning is so exhausted from all the work that's happening right now. So I thank you guys. You're doing such an amazing job, and it's a marathon and we're very close to the end. So I don't want to trip you up as you're crossing the finish line. So thank you for all that hard work.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you for that. Yes, agreed. And we'll all pop a virtual bottle of champagne when we pass that regional council. And I know that we'll hear the sigh of relief from all the planners and everyone involved in HRM when that vote is cast at that time. So again, we'll appreciate that, Councilor Cleary. So moving on, we have no motions.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. So the final votes to
right, you were right.
Motion is required and it's super long, so I will send it to you by email, so you can take a look at it.
Oh my! All right, I forgot about that. I tried to avoid it, I guess.
We need to vote
So-
on the motion as amended.
Exactly.
Question on the
So-
motion as amended.
Do we need, I'll ask our clerk, should this be read into the the record, or could we just say as amended?
That's it's depends on the wish of the community council. So that just, I mean, the motion is fine. If the community council wish to read, that's also fine.
So I'm going to grasp my colleagues here. Would you like one of you to read this motion that is very long, or
No.
would you like to
I
present
think
it
just
as
as
amended?
amended.
All right. So I asked for the question on the main motion as amended.
Question.
Questions been called. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Great, thank you. So that is that. Now, really quickly, Miss Clerk, are we actually done this time?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So moving on to motions, there are none in camera. There's no in camera. There are no added items. Public participation, nobody has signed up. And just a reminder that those watching from home, in order to have signed up for speaker for the deadline was 4:30 p.m. the business day prior to the meeting. We have no speakers signed up for today's meeting. Our next meeting will be held July 13th, 2021. And I ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Councilor Cuttle. That is it. Thanks, colleagues.